Hundred Acre Wood. At the center of the woods, a group of friends had gathered: Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, Rabbit, and more. They all stood together, their faces a mix of joy and sadness, as they looked at their dear friend Christopher Robin. Today was a special day, but also a bittersweet one, for Christopher was going away to school. He was growing up and stepping into a new adventure that didn't involve the Hundred Acre Wood. Pooh, with his round tummy and gentle heart, looked up at Christopher, his eyes full of both hope and worry. "Christopher Robin, must you really go?" he asked, his voice soft and filled with love. Christopher knelt down to meet Pooh's gaze, giving him a warm smile. "I have to, Pooh. It's time for me to go out and learn new things. But even when I'm far away, I'll always remember you. I promise." Pooh blinked, trying to understand. "Even when you're doing grown-up things, you'll still remember us?" Christopher nodded firmly. "Especially then, Pooh. You and all my friends here are too special to ever forget." Nearby, Tigger, usually full of bounces and giggles, felt a bit quieter today. "But who's gonna bounce with me when you're gone, Christopher, old buddy?" he asked, his usual cheer a little faded. Christopher chuckled and patted Tigger's head. "You'll keep bouncing, Tigger. You always do. And when I come back, we'll bounce together, just like we always have." Tiny Piglet tugged gently at Christopher's sleeve, looking up with big, worried eyes.
"Oh, dear.
"I'm going to miss you so much, Christopher Robin. What if you forget us?" Christopher leaned down, his heart swelling with affection for his little friend. "I could never forget you, Piglet. Not in 100 years. All of you are too precious to me." Eeyore, standing a bit away from the group, sighed his usual sigh. "Well, I suppose this is it."
He's going.
"Knew it would happen eventually. Growing up means you leave things behind." Christopher smiled gently at Eeyore. "I'll come back, Eeyore. And when I do, we'll have more adventures, just like always." Eeyore gave a slow nod.
"If you say so."
"I'll be here. Not much else to do, I suppose." Rabbit, always practical and a bit fussy, stepped forward. "Now, Christopher Robin, if you're going off to school, you'd best be prepared. Do you have your books? Your pencils? Everything organized?" Christopher laughed softly, nodding at Rabbit. "Yes, Rabbit, I'm all set. I'll make sure to stay organized, just like you taught me." As Christopher looked around at his friends, he felt a mix of happiness and sadness. These weren't just friends, they were his family. They had been with him through every game, every adventure, and every quiet moment in the woods. Leaving them was hard, but he knew it was something he had to do. Pooh stepped forward once more, holding out a small pot of honey. "Here, Christopher Robin. It's not much, but maybe you'd like a little honey to take with you, just in case you get hungry." Christopher's heart warmed as he took the honey pot. "Thank you, Pooh. I'll keep this with me always." For a moment, the forest was quiet as the friends felt the weight of this farewell. Christopher looked at each of them, Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, Rabbit, and saw the love in their eyes. The 100-acre wood had been his safe haven, his place of joy, and now he was about to leave it behind. But as he looked into their faces, he knew that no matter how far he went or how much he grew, this place and these friends would always be a part of him. "I'll come back," Christopher said, his voice full of promise. "And when I do, we'll have even more adventures, just like always." Pooh nodded, his round eyes filled with trust. "We'll be here, Christopher Robin. Always." With that, Christopher gave each of his friends one last hug. He felt the softness of Pooh's fur, the bounce in Tigger's step, the warmth of Piglet's paws. With each hug, he made a promise to himself that he would never let them go, no matter where life took him. Then, with one last look back at the 100-acre wood, Christopher Robin turned and walked away, his heart full of memories and his spirit full of hope. The friends watched as he disappeared into the trees, the soft light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the forest floor. Even as Christopher faded from view, the love they shared remained, filling the 100-acre wood with a peaceful glow. And so, though Christopher Robin was stepping into a new adventure, he knew he would always have a home in the 100-acre wood. For friendships like theirs were forever, unbreakable by time or distance. In their hearts, he would always be there, and the magic of their adventures would live on. In the 100-Acre Wood, they knew one thing for sure, that friendships, once made, never truly end. They simply carry on, as strong as ever, waiting for the next adventure to bring them together again. Years had passed since Christopher Robin last roamed the sunlit paths of the 100-Acre Wood, laughing with his friends, Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, and Eeyore. While the forest continued to bloom with life and gentle whispers, Christopher had grown up and moved far away, settling into the rush and hum of a busy city. Now a young man with important responsibilities, Christopher spent his days in a tall building, working in an office that buzzed with activity. His life was filled with paperwork, meetings, and the constant need to get things done. He wore a suit every day, carried a briefcase, and tried his best to live up to the expectations of his boss, Mr. Winslow, a man who never seemed to stop rushing. One particular day, Mr. Winslow stormed into Christopher's office, his voice booming with urgency. "Robin, we need to cut costs around here. You're in charge of figuring it out." Christopher nodded, feeling the weight of the task settle heavily on his shoulders. "Yes, sir," he replied, even as his thoughts drifted to a promise he had made long ago to his friends in the 100-Acre Wood, a promise to never forget them, no matter how much he grew up. That evening, Christopher returned home later than usual. His wife, Evelyn, and their young daughter, Madeline, were waiting for him, dinner on the table. Madeline's eyes sparkled with excitement as she talked about their planned weekend trip to the countryside. But Christopher hesitated. With so much work to do, he knew he wouldn't be able to join them. "I'm sorry, Madeline," he said softly, ruffling her hair. "I have to work this weekend. We'll go another time, I promise." Madeline's face fell, but she gave a small nod, trying to understand. Evelyn, however, looked at him with concern. "Christopher, you're always working. Madeline needs time with you. We both do." He sighed, knowing she was right but feeling torn between his responsibilities and his family. "I have to work hard to make things happen, Evelyn. It's just part of being an adult." As they cleared the table, Madeline slipped away to her room, her quiet disappointment tugging at Christopher's heart. Later, as he prepared for bed, Evelyn spoke softly, her voice filled with worry. "Christopher, life isn't just about work. It's about moments, memories, being there for the people who love you." Christopher lay awake that night, her words echoing in his mind. As he stared at the ceiling, memories of the 100-Acre Wood came flooding back. He remembered afternoons spent doing nothing with Pooh, which always seemed to turn into something magical. Back then, life had felt so simple, so free, and he missed it deeply. In the stillness of the night, he wondered if he could ever go back to that feeling of ease, of belonging, of simply being. Could he find a way to bring that sense of wonder into his life now, even with all his grown-up responsibilities? His heart ached with the weight of it, but somewhere inside, a small spark of hope flickered. As he drifted off to sleep, Christopher promised himself that he wouldn't let go of those memories, those friendships, and the lessons he had learned in the 100-Acre Wood. No matter where life took him, he would always carry a piece of that magic with him, a reminder that sometimes the most important things in life aren't the things we do, but the love we share and the people who are there for us through it all. And, perhaps, he would find his way back to the woods one day, to remind himself and his family that the best adventures often come from the simplest moments. Christopher Robin's days were filled with important responsibilities. Each morning, he would rise early, put on his suit, and join the steady stream of people hurrying through the busy city streets. Like everyone else, Christopher was always in a rush, his mind constantly filled with things that needed to be done. But beneath all that busyness, he carried a special responsibility that mattered more than any deadline, being a father to his bright and curious daughter, Madeline. Madeline adored her father and loved hearing stories about the 100-Acre Wood, tales of her dad's adventures with Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, and the rest of the gang. But lately, Christopher was so wrapped up in his work that he barely had time to tell her those stories anymore. One Saturday morning, as soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, Madeline bounded into the living room, clutching a book. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she looked up at her father.
Daddy.
"Can we go to the park today?" "You promised," she said, her voice full of hope. Christopher looked up from the stack of papers that covered the table. He wanted to go to the park, to run around with Madeline, to laugh and play games like they used to. But his eyes fell back on the papers, a reminder of the deadline he couldn't ignore. "I'm really sorry, Madeline," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "I have a lot of work to finish today. Maybe next weekend." Madeline's face fell, her excitement fading. She nodded quietly, sitting down in a corner with her book. She tried to read, but her mind drifted to the park, imagining the fun they could have had together. Later that day, Christopher's wife, Evelyn, sat down beside him. "Christopher, you've been working every weekend. Madeline misses you." "I miss you too," she said gently. Christopher rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, but if I don't get this done, there'll be trouble at work." "But what about us, Christopher?" Evelyn asked softly. "Madeline is growing up fast. She needs you here, not just your promises." Christopher leaned back and gazed out the window, feeling a pang of regret. He had promised himself he'd always be there for Madeline, just as he'd once promised Pooh he'd never forget him. But somehow, life had turned into a series of deadlines and responsibilities, and he felt as though he was drifting further from the things that truly mattered. That evening, as the city grew quiet, Christopher found his thoughts drifting back to the 100-acre wood. He remembered how Pooh would ask him to do nothing with him, and how those moments of nothing always became something magical. What if he could find a way to balance his work and his family? Maybe he could be there for both worlds. Before heading to bed, Christopher peeked into Madeline's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. He tiptoed over and sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm sorry, Madeline," he whispered. "I'll do better. I promise." The next morning, Christopher woke up with a new resolve. He decided he would find a way to finish his work without letting it overshadow his time with Madeline. Slowly, he started making changes, small steps at first, like setting aside time each day to play with her, to read stories, and to share tales of the 100-acre wood. Little by little, he began to rediscover the joy of doing nothing, the kind of nothing that meant everything. And as he spent more time with Madeline, he found that he wasn't just telling her stories, he was living them again, through her laughter and wonder. Though he still had a long way to go, Christopher felt a warmth in his heart that hadn't been there for a long time. He realized that the memories of his childhood and his friends in the 100-acre wood were never far away. They were right there with him, calling him back to the simple, precious moments he'd almost forgotten. And in those moments, he knew he was becoming the kind of father he had always wanted to be. One morning, Christopher Robin was sitting in his small office, surrounded by stacks of papers. His brow was furrowed as he worked on some important numbers for his job. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, reminding him of the many deadlines he had to meet. Suddenly, Christopher heard a faint noise. At first, he thought it was just the wind or maybe the creak of an old floorboard. But then, he heard it again, a soft, familiar voice. "Christopher Robin?" He blinked in surprise and looked around. No one else was in the office with him. The voice couldn't be real. Could it? He shook his head and went back to his work. But the voice called again, this time a little louder. "Christopher Robin?" Christopher's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard that voice in years, since he was a boy. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window, and there, standing on the windowsill, was none other than Winnie the Pooh. Pooh was just as Christopher remembered him, soft, round, and golden, with a red shirt that was just a little too small. He had a thoughtful expression on his face as he looked up at Christopher with wide, honey-colored eyes. "Pooh!" Christopher exclaimed, nearly falling out of his chair. He rubbed his eyes, convinced that he was dreaming.
You
can't be here."
How?
"How are you here?" Pooh scratched his head and replied simply, "Well, I went through the door where Christopher Robin always is." And now, here I am. Christopher couldn't believe what he was seeing. He hadn't thought about Pooh and the 100 Acre Wood in so long. He had been so busy with work, with responsibilities, that he had forgotten about his old friends. But here was Pooh, standing in front of him, as real as ever. "You shouldn't be here," Christopher muttered to himself, shaking his head. This must be some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Pooh, however, wasn't concerned at all. He waddled over to Christopher's desk, looking around curiously. "Why are you in this big, gray place, Christopher Robin?" Pooh asked, glancing at the piles of papers. "It's not very fun in here. Where's the honey?" Christopher gave a small, nervous laugh. "I don't have any honey here, Pooh. I'm working. Adults have to work." Pooh tilted his head and asked, "But why?" Christopher paused. It was a simple question, but one that felt difficult to answer. "Well, because that's what grown-ups do. They work hard, so they can take care of their families.
And
Well, that's just how things are." Pooh seemed to think about this for a moment, but then he smiled his soft, thoughtful smile. "But, Christopher Robin, don't you remember? Doing nothing often leads to the very best something." Christopher looked down at his desk, at all the paperwork that seemed to swallow him whole. He had been so focused on doing everything that he had forgotten the joy of doing nothing, of just being, of enjoying the moment. "I don't have time for nothing anymore, Pooh," he said softly. "There's too much to do." "But that's the thing," Pooh said as he looked up at Christopher with wise eyes. "If you don't make time for nothing, you might miss out on the best something." Christopher was about to respond when there was a knock on his office door. Startled, he quickly turned around, but when he looked back at Pooh, the little bear was gone. Christopher blinked in confusion. Had it all been in his imagination? The door opened, and his assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Robin, the meeting is about to start." Right. I'll be there in a moment," Christopher said, gathering his papers. But as he stood up, he caught a glimpse of something on the floor, a tiny footprint. A small, round, honey-covered footprint, just like the kind Pooh would leave. Christopher stared at it for a long moment, a smile slowly forming on his face. Maybe he wasn't imagining things after all. Maybe, just maybe, Pooh had really been there. As he left his office and headed to the meeting, Christopher couldn't help but feel a little lighter, as though the weight of all his responsibilities wasn't quite as heavy as before. For the first time in a long while, he thought about the 100 Acre Wood, about his friends, and about how sometimes doing nothing was the best something of all. It was an ordinary day, or at least, that's what Christopher Robin thought as he stepped out of his office. The streets of London were bustling as always, filled with the sounds of honking cars and the chatter of busy people. Christopher walked down the sidewalk, his mind swirling with thoughts of meetings, deadlines, and endless work. But something felt different today, something strange. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw him again.
Pooh,
Christopher whispered, stopping in his tracks. There, standing just a few feet away, was Winnie the Pooh. The little bear was standing on the edge of the busy street, gazing up at the tall buildings with a puzzled expression. In his paw, he held a honey pot, of course. "Christopher Robin," Pooh called out happily, his face lighting up as he waved his paw. "I thought I might find you here." Christopher blinked, half expecting Pooh to disappear like a dream. But the bear was still there, as real as the cars zooming past them.
Pooh,
"You're really here again?" Christopher hurried over, looking around to make sure no one else was seeing what he was seeing. Pooh nodded, his eyes bright and full of curiosity. "Yes, I've been looking for you, Christopher Robin."
And
"I seem to have gotten a little lost." Pooh glanced up at the towering buildings, his brow furrowing. "This isn't the 100 Acre Wood, is it?" Christopher couldn't help but laugh. "No, Pooh, this is London. It's a big, noisy city. Not like the woods at all." Pooh looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded slowly.
I see.
"Well, it's very not quiet here." He tilted his head. "But, Christopher, I need to find our friends. I can't find Piglet, or Tigger, or anyone. They're all gone." Christopher knelt down beside Pooh, placing a gentle hand on his soft shoulder. They're not gone, Pooh. They're probably still in the 100 Acre Wood. Pooh's face lit up.
Oh.
Then we must go there, Christopher Robin. We must go back and find them. Christopher hesitated. He hadn't been back to the 100 Acre Wood in so many years. His grown-up life had taken him far from the adventures he once shared with Pooh and the others. Could he really go back? Did the 100 Acre Wood even still exist for him? But as he looked into Pooh's hopeful eyes, something stirred inside him. A memory. A feeling. The 100 Acre Wood had always been more than just a place, it was home. It was a world where anything was possible, where friends stuck together through thick and thin. And maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what he needed. All right, Pooh, Christopher said, standing tall and brushing the city dust from his suit. Let's go back. Let's go find our friends. Pooh's face broke into a wide smile, and he gave a little happy bounce. Oh, goody. I knew you'd help, Christopher Robin. I knew you would. And so, the unlikely pair set off on their journey. Christopher hailed a taxi, and as they rode through the city streets, Pooh's eyes were as wide as saucers. My, look at all the people, he said, his nose pressed against the window. Do you think they're going to the woods too? Christopher chuckled.
No, Pooh.
Most of them are going to work, like I usually do. Pooh nodded, though he didn't seem to fully understand. It's good to do work sometimes, he said thoughtfully, but it's also good to do nothing once in a while. Christopher smiled. That simple wisdom was what made Pooh so special. He saw the world in a way no one else did. As the city slowly gave way to the countryside, Christopher felt something shift inside him. The air became fresher, the noise faded away, and the trees began to stretch out like old friends welcoming him home. For the first time in years, he could breathe. We're almost there, Pooh, Christopher said, his heart beating faster with every mile. The car came to a stop at the edge of the forest, and Christopher and Pooh stepped out. The 100 Acre Wood stood before them, just as it had all those years ago, tall trees, lush grass, and the familiar smell of pine and wildflowers. It was as if time had stopped here, preserving the magic of the place they had once called home. Pooh took a deep breath and smiled. Ah, this is much better. Much more. Woody. Christopher laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Together, they stepped into the woods, their footsteps soft on the mossy ground. Birds chirped above them, and the sunlight danced through the leaves. As they wandered deeper into the woods, they called out for their old friends. Piglet.
Tigger.
Eeyore. Pooh shouted, cupping his paws around his mouth. But the woods were quiet. Christopher frowned. Where could they be? Just then, there was a rustling sound from behind a nearby bush. Christopher and Pooh froze, listening. Out popped a small, timid figure, a tiny pink pig with wide eyes. Piglet. Pooh cried, rushing over and hugging his friend tightly. Oh, dear. Oh, my. Oh, goodness. Piglet squeaked, nearly falling over from the excitement.
Pooh.
Christopher Robin. Is it really you? Christopher smiled warmly. It's really us, Piglet. We're back. Piglet's little heart was racing with joy. Oh, I'm so glad to see you.
But
where's Tigger? Where's Eeyore? We're looking for them too, Pooh said, scratching his head. But don't worry, Piglet. We'll find them. The three friends set off together, their laughter and chatter echoing through the woods. As they walked, the familiar sounds of the 100 Acre Wood returned, birds singing, the wind whispering through the trees, and the faint sound of bouncing in the distance. Suddenly, a loud boing echoed through the trees, and a striped figure came flying into view, bouncing up and down with a big grin. Tiggers are what Tiggers do best, Tigger yelled, leaping through the air and landing right in front of them. And Tigger's back in action, baby. Christopher and Pooh burst into laughter, and soon enough, Eeyore appeared, trudging along behind Tigger with his usual gloomy expression. Well, it's about time someone found me, he said, though there was a hint of a smile on his face. And just like that, the gang was back together. The 100 Acre Wood was filled with laughter once more, and Christopher Robin, who had thought he had outgrown these magical adventures, realized that some things never change. No matter how old he got, no matter how far life took him, the 100 Acre Wood and the friends who lived there would always be a part of him. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest, Christopher sat down with his friends around a cozy fire. He felt the warmth of the flames and the warmth of their friendship. For the first time in a long time, Christopher Robin wasn't worried about work, or deadlines, or anything else. All that mattered was the magic of the moment. And it was in that moment that Christopher knew this was the best adventure of all. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the 100 Acre Wood. The soft light filtered through the leaves, making the forest glow with a golden hue. Christopher Robin, Pooh, Piglet, and Tigger walked together, their footsteps light on the soft, mossy ground. There was a calmness in the air, but the excitement of being reunited bubbled up in each of their hearts like a joyous secret. "We've found Piglet and Tigger," Christopher said, smiling at his friends. "Now, we just need to find the others." "Oh, yes," Pooh agreed, his tummy giving a little growl. "And maybe we'll find some honey, too." Tigger, always full of energy, bounced up and down on his tail. "Don't you worry, Christopher, old pal. Tigger's the best finder there is. Why, I can find anything, Eeyore, rabbit, or even a bouncy spot for us all to jump on." Piglet, who was trying to keep up with Tigger's bouncing, looked around nervously. "Oh dear. Oh my. I hope we find them soon. What if something's happened to them?" Christopher Robin knelt down beside Piglet and patted his tiny shoulder. "Don't worry, Piglet. We'll find them. They're our friends, and friends always stick together." As they continued through the woods, a soft breeze rustled the leaves, making the branches dance overhead. The air smelled sweet, like flowers blooming after a gentle rain. Everything felt just right. But something was still missing: the rest of their friends. Suddenly, a familiar sound echoed through the trees. It was a low, slow voice, full of gloom and grumble. "Well, it's about time somebody found me," the voice said, and out from behind a large oak tree stepped none other than Eeyore, his tail pinned in place and his long face looking as gloomy as ever. "Eeyore!" they all cried in unison, rushing over to him. Eeyore blinked slowly and gave them a half-hearted smile. "Oh, it's you lot. Thought you'd forgotten all about me." Pooh waddled up and gave Eeyore a big bear hug. "Oh no, Eeyore. We could never forget you. Christopher Robin's here too, and we're all together again." Eeyore sighed, his ears drooping. "Well, that's nice, I suppose. Not much to celebrate, though. I've been standing here all day, just waiting for the rain to come." Tigger bounced up and circled around Eeyore. "Cheer up, old buddy. Who needs rain when you've got friends like us, huh? We're gonna have a party, and it's gonna be stupendous." Christopher chuckled and shook his head. "It's good to see you, Eeyore. It wouldn't be the 100 Acre Wood without you." Eeyore mumbled, though there was a tiny flicker of happiness in his eyes. "Well, I guess it's nice to be included." With Eeyore now part of the group, the friends set off again, their footsteps light with the joy of being together. The woods were starting to feel like home again, the way they used to when Christopher was a boy. The trees seemed taller, the air seemed fresher, and every corner they turned brought back old memories of their adventures. As they walked, Pooh turned to Christopher. "Christopher Robin, do you think Rabbit is all right? He's always so busy organizing things. I'm afraid he's forgotten to come find us." Christopher smiled warmly. "We'll find Rabbit, Pooh. He's probably just busy tidying up his garden." And right on cue, as if Christopher had spoken the magic words, they heard a voice from up ahead. "Come along now. There's work to be done. No time for dilly-dallying." The friends rushed forward, pushing past a thick patch of bushes, and there, in the middle of a clearing, stood Rabbit. He was holding a tiny rake, meticulously tidying up his carrot patch. He looked as flustered as ever, his ears twitching with concentration. "Rabbit," Pooh called out, waving his paw. "We've been looking all over for you." Rabbit looked up, startled.
"What? Oh, Pooh."
"Christopher Robin." He dropped his rake in surprise and rushed over to them. "Well, thank goodness you're all here. Do you know how behind we are on the schedule?" I've been trying to clean up, and there's so much to do. So much to organize. Christopher chuckled and placed a hand on Rabbit's shoulder. It's all right, Rabbit. You don't have to do everything by yourself. We're all here now. Rabbit took a deep breath, calming himself down. Yes, yes, of course. You're right. Then, with a small smile, he added, It's good to see you again, Christopher. Together, they helped Rabbit finish tidying up the garden. Tigger bounced around the rows of carrots, knocking them over with his enthusiastic jumps, while Piglet and Pooh tried their best to fix the damage. Eeyore, naturally, didn't mind watching from the side, occasionally pointing out where things might have gone wrong. As they worked, the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant hues of pink, orange, and gold. The 100-acre wood felt alive again, filled with the sounds of laughter, the rustling of leaves, and the familiar voices of friends who had been apart for far too long. When the garden was finally in order, well, mostly in order, they all sat together under a large oak tree. Christopher looked around at his friends, Pooh with his ever-hopeful smile, Piglet cuddled close to Tigger, Eeyore resting his head in the grass, and Rabbit finally taking a break. It was in that moment that Christopher felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep sense of peace, the kind that only comes when you're with the people who matter most. This feels just right, Christopher said softly, his heart swelling with happiness. It feels like I'm home. Pooh looked up at him, his eyes twinkling with joy. You'll always be home here, Christopher Robin. No matter where you go, you'll always have us. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Christopher realized that Pooh was right. The 100-acre wood wasn't just a place. It was a part of him, a part of his heart. And as long as he had his friends, he would never be far from home. The night in the 100-acre wood was peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes when you're surrounded by friends who make everything feel right. But as the stars twinkled above and the gentle breeze rustled the leaves, Christopher Robin couldn't help but feel a small weight tugging at his heart. He looked around at his friends, all of whom were starting to doze off. Pooh was snuggled up against his side, his soft bear snore barely audible. Piglet had curled up beside Tigger, who was still bouncing in his dreams, his tail twitching every now and then. Eeyore lay sprawled out with his head resting on a rock, and even Rabbit, who usually worried about everything, had relaxed into a quiet sleep under the stars. Christopher smiled softly, but the smile didn't last. For while this moment felt perfect, a little voice in his head whispered that it couldn't last forever. He was an adult now, after all, with responsibilities, with work. Soon, he'd have to leave the 100-acre wood again, return to the bustling city, and back to the grown-up world that always seemed so much more complicated than this. As if sensing his worry, Pooh stirred beside him, opening his eyes with a sleepy blink. "Christopher Robin?" he asked, his voice soft like honey. "Why are you awake?" Christopher gave a small sigh, running his hand through his hair. "Oh, Pooh, it's just... I've missed this place so much. But I'm not a child anymore. I have so much to do. So many things to take care of. I'm worried I won't be able to come back here again." Pooh sat up slowly, his round belly wobbling a little. "But why, Christopher Robin? Why wouldn't you be able to come back? The 100-acre wood is always here. And so are we." Christopher smiled at Pooh's innocence, but he shook his head. "It's not that simple, Pooh. When you grow up, life gets... well, it gets more complicated. There's work and meetings and things that they just get in the way." Pooh tilted his head, as if trying to understand, but then he smiled his gentle smile. "I think, Christopher Robin, that sometimes the things that get in the way are the things we don't really need. Like when you're looking for honey and find an empty pot. Maybe it's time to find a full pot instead." Christopher chuckled at Pooh's logic. "I wish it were that easy." Pooh, sensing that his friend needed more than a simple answer, scooted closer and looked up at him with those big, thoughtful eyes. "Christopher Robin, do you remember when we used to do nothing?" Christopher nodded, his mind drifting back to those simple days. "Yes, Pooh, I remember." "And do you remember what you said?" Pooh asked, his voice soft and steady. "You said, doing nothing often leads to the very best something." Christopher felt a warmth spread through him, the memory so vivid that it almost seemed like it had happened yesterday. He had said those words to Pooh long ago, and back then they had been true. But now, could they still be? Pooh smiled and patted Christopher's knee. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to do nothing again. Before Christopher could reply, a rustling sound came from the bushes behind them. Christopher tensed for a moment, but then a familiar bouncy figure appeared, springing through the bushes with a wide grin. It was Tigger, of course, unable to sit still for too long. Did somebody say doing nothing? Tigger laughed as he bounced up to them. Why, that's what Tiggers do best, when they're not bouncing, that is. Pooh giggled softly, and even Christopher couldn't help but smile. You're right, Tigger, Christopher said with a sigh, but in the grown-up world, doing nothing doesn't always seem possible. Tigger frowned and scratched his head, his tail still bouncing beneath him. Well, that's a pickle, all right. But why not do something fun while you're busy doing nothing? Like bouncing. Or exploring. Or oh, I know. How about we find Eeyore's tail again? I'm sure it's fallen off somewhere. Christopher laughed, and suddenly, the heavy weight on his heart began to feel a little lighter. His friends, Pooh, Tigger, Piglet, and even Eeyore, they didn't understand the pressures of grown-up life, but maybe that was exactly what he needed. A reminder that not everything had to be so serious. I guess I could try, Christopher said after a long pause. Maybe I need to remember how to do nothing, even just for a little while. Pooh's eyes sparkled with joy. Oh, yes. That's a wonderful idea, Christopher Robin. And while you're doing nothing, we can do something like having a picnic or finding more honey or just being together. Tigger bounced higher. And don't forget the bouncing. Bouncing is always a good idea. Christopher chuckled and stood up, stretching his arms toward the sky. All right then. Let's do nothing together. And so, as the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a silver glow over the 100-acre wood, Christopher Robin and his friends wandered deeper into the forest, doing nothing and everything all at once. They played silly games, they laughed, they chased fireflies, and they felt the world slow down around them. For a little while, Christopher forgot about the city, forgot about work, and forgot about the endless meetings. He was just Christopher Robin again, a boy in the 100-acre wood, with his best friends by his side. As the night wore on and the stars twinkled like diamonds in the sky, Christopher felt a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. Maybe, just maybe, Pooh was right. Doing nothing could lead to the very best something. And in that moment, as they lay beneath the wide-open sky, Christopher made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't let grown-up life take away the magic of the 100-acre wood. No matter how busy things became, no matter how much work there was to do, he would always find a way to come back, to be with his friends, to remember how to do nothing. Because nothing, after all, was sometimes the most important thing of all. The morning sun rose slowly over the 100-acre wood, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange. Dew sparkled on the leaves, and the air smelled fresh and clean, as though the forest itself had just woken up from a peaceful slumber. Christopher Robin, Pooh, and their friends were still deep in the woods, but today felt different, a little more magical, a little more full of wonder. Christopher stretched his arms toward the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The worries of the adult world had slowly begun to fade, replaced by the simple joy of being back in a place where anything was possible. And for the first time in a long time, Christopher felt truly alive. "What shall we do today?" asked Piglet, looking up at Christopher with wide, hopeful eyes. "Shall we go on an adventure?" "Oh, yes, please," cried Tigger, bouncing up and down excitedly. Adventures are what Tiggers do best. Pooh, ever thoughtful, tapped his chin with his paw. Perhaps we should go looking for honey. It's been a while since my last pot, and I'm feeling a bit rumbly in my tumbly. Christopher laughed softly. "We could go on an adventure and look for honey, Pooh. How does that sound?" Pooh's eyes lit up. "Oh, that sounds like a very good plan, Christopher Robin. A very good plan indeed." And so, with a bounce in their step, the friends set off into the forest, ready to see where the day would take them. The path they walked was familiar, but today, it felt full of new possibilities. Birds chirped merrily in the trees above, and the leaves whispered in the breeze, as if they were telling the friends secrets only the woods knew. As they wandered deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to grow taller, the light more golden, and the world more magical with each step. It wasn't long before they reached a clearing, one they had never seen before. In the middle of the clearing stood an enormous tree, its branches stretching high into the sky. At the base of the tree was a small door, just big enough for someone like Pooh or Piglet to fit through. "What's this?" Piglet asked, his voice full of wonder. "I don't remember this tree being here before." "Me neither," said Christopher, scratching his head. "But then again, the 100-acre wood is full of surprises." Tigger bounced up to the door and knocked loudly. "Hello. Anybody home?" To their surprise, the door creaked open all by itself. Inside, they could see a spiral staircase winding upward, disappearing into the treetop. A sense of excitement buzzed through the group. "Let's go," Tigger said, already halfway inside. Pooh hesitated for a moment, looking longingly at the door, then at his friends. "Do you think there's honey up there?" "There's only one way to find out," Christopher said with a grin. And so, with Pooh leading the way, they stepped inside the tree. The staircase was narrow, but it felt cozy, as though the tree itself was welcoming them. The higher they climbed, the more magical everything seemed to become. The walls were lined with glowing lights, flickering like tiny stars, and the air smelled faintly of honey and flowers. As they reached the top, they found themselves in a wide, open space nestled in the treetops. The room was filled with soft pillows, shelves of books, and jars upon jars of honey stacked neatly in every corner. "Oh, bother!" Pooh exclaimed, his eyes widening with delight. "This is the most wonderful place I've ever seen." The friends sat down on the soft pillows, each of them feeling the magic in the air. As Pooh happily dipped into the nearest jar of honey, Christopher leaned back and closed his eyes, letting his imagination take over. He remembered the stories he used to tell as a boy, the wild adventures he dreamed up with his friends in the 100-acre wood. Back then, their games had no limits, and their imaginations could turn the simplest of things into the grandest adventures. "I remember," Christopher said softly, "when we used to pretend this forest was full of hidden kingdoms and enchanted places. And we could be anything we wanted, explorers, pirates, knights. Anything." Pooh, his mouth full of honey, nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I remember. And it was always the best kind of fun." Tigger bounced in place. "We could be explorers again. Tiggers are great at exploring. I could find hidden treasure. Or maybe I'll be a knight this time. The Knight of Bounce." Piglet, feeling a bit braver than usual, chimed in, "I think I'll be an explorer too. Maybe we can go on a journey to find a secret kingdom.
And oh,
Maybe there will be a dragon we can befriend." Christopher smiled, his heart swelling with the warmth of their shared memories. "You know what? I think we should. Let's pretend again. Let's make this tree our castle, and the 100-acre wood will be our kingdom." In an instant, the forest came alive with their imaginations. The tree they were in became a grand castle with tall towers that touched the clouds. The soft pillows turned into golden thrones, and the jars of honey were the royal feast. Outside, the 100-acre wood transformed into a vast, enchanted kingdom full of hidden treasures, friendly dragons, and magical creatures. Tigger took on his role as the brave knight, bouncing across the room with a pretend sword. "Fear not. Sir Tigger is here to protect the kingdom from all dangers." Piglet, holding an imaginary map, led the way as the cautious yet brave explorer. "I think the secret kingdom is this way. We just have to follow the river of stars." Pooh, of course, declared himself the royal honey tester, making sure all the honey in the kingdom was just right. "A very important job," he said between mouthfuls. And Christopher? He was the king of the kingdom of imagination, the ruler of a land where dreams came to life, and where anything was possible. For a while, they were no longer bound by the rules of the grown-up world. They were free to dream, to play, to let their imaginations take them wherever they wanted to go. As the day went on, they explored their magical kingdom, fought pretend battles with friendly dragons, and shared stories of their many adventures. The 100-acre wood had never felt more alive. But as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the treetops, Christopher knew that their adventure, for now, was coming to an end. Slowly, the magic of their imagined kingdom faded, and the 100-acre would return to the quiet, peaceful forest it had always been. But something had changed. Christopher realized that while the magic of the 100-acre wood was real, the true magic had always come from their imaginations. And that magic, he knew, would never fade. "We can always come back, can't we?" Piglet asked quietly as they began their walk home. Christopher smiled. "Yes, Piglet. We can always come back. No matter how far we go, or how much we grow up, the 100-acre wood will always be here, waiting for us." And with that promise, they returned to the heart of the forest, where their real adventures had begun. And though the grown-up world might call Christopher Robin back soon, he knew that his imagination would always lead him back to the place where everything was possible. Because in the 100-acre wood, the power of imagination was the strongest magic of all. The sky above the 100-acre wood was now painted with the soft colors of twilight. Shades of lavender and pink stretched across the horizon as the sun began to dip behind the treetops. The air was cool and crisp, and everything seemed to move more slowly, as if the whole forest was ready for a peaceful night. Christopher Robin and his friends were walking back from their grand adventure, each step filled with the joy of the day they had shared. They had imagined castles, fought friendly dragons, and explored a magical kingdom, but now it was time to return to their quiet little corner of the woods. As they reached a small clearing, Christopher paused, looking up at the sky. The stars were starting to twinkle, just like tiny diamonds scattered across a blanket of velvet. There was something peaceful about the sight, something that made him feel like he didn't need to rush anywhere, that in this moment, everything was just as it should be. Pooh, always attuned to Christopher's feelings, stopped beside him and gazed up at the sky too. His little bare paws rested on his round tummy, and his eyes were wide with wonder. "What are you thinking about, Christopher Robin?" Pooh asked, his voice gentle and curious. Christopher smiled down at his old friend, but his smile held a bit of sadness. "I'm just thinking about how perfect today has been, Pooh. I wish I could stay here forever, but I know I'll have to go back soon." Pooh tilted his head, as though trying to understand. "Go back.
But why?"
"The 100-acre wood will always be here for you." Christopher sighed, his heart heavy with the weight of grown-up worries. "That's just it, Pooh. The 100-acre wood will always be here, but I can't be here all the time. I have responsibilities, a job, and a family. There are so many things I need to take care of in the world outside." Pooh blinked, looking up at Christopher with his kind, honey-colored eyes. "But, Christopher Robin, you've taken care of us today, haven't you?" Christopher frowned, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?" Pooh sat down on a patch of soft grass, patting the ground beside him. Christopher followed, sitting down next to his old friend. "Well," Pooh began, his voice thoughtful, "you came here, didn't you? You spent time with us, and we had the most wonderful adventures. You took care of your friends, and now you're sitting here with me, enjoying the stars. Isn't that important too?" Christopher gazed at Pooh, the simple wisdom in his words sinking into his heart. "It is important, Pooh. But sometimes I feel like I have to do so much more. Like I have to work all the time to make sure everything is okay." Pooh smiled softly. "Oh, I understand. But sometimes, doing less is what makes everything more." "Okay." He scratched his head, searching for the right words. "You see, Christopher Robin, when I'm looking for honey, I don't rush. I take my time. If I rush, I might miss it or spill it, or forget to enjoy the sweetness. Maybe grown-up life is a little like honey. You have to take it slow, or you'll miss the best parts." Christopher's heart swelled with warmth. In all his busy days, with meetings, deadlines, and long hours of work, he had forgotten the simple joys of life. Pooh's words reminded him that life didn't have to be a constant rush. Sometimes, the most important thing was to pause, to enjoy the moment, to savor the sweetness like a jar of honey. "You're right, Pooh," Christopher said softly. "Maybe I've been rushing too much. Maybe I've been so focused on what I have to do that I've forgotten to enjoy the things that really matter." Pooh beamed, his little bear face glowing with happiness. "That's right. And Christopher Robin, you don't have to stay here forever to remember that. You can take the 100-acre wood with you." Christopher looked at Pooh, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Well," Pooh said, tapping his tummy thoughtfully, "the 100-acre wood isn't just a place, Christopher Robin. It's all the things we've done, all the adventures we've shared. It's the way you feel when you're with your friends. You can carry that with you wherever you go." Christopher stared at Pooh, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Pooh was right, of course. The 100-acre wood wasn't just trees and meadows. It was the feeling of joy, of friendship, of simple, quiet moments that made life rich and full. And no matter how busy his grown-up life became, those feelings were always with him, just waiting for him to remember. Pooh gave a little nod, as if to say, "See? I told you so." The other friends had gathered around by now, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, and Rabbit, all sitting in the clearing, looking up at the stars.
Tigger gave a little bounce.
"Well, of course. We'll always be here when you need a bounce or two, Christopher Robin. No matter how bouncy things get," Piglet, always shy but brave, whispered, "and whenever you're feeling a little small in the big, grown-up world, we'll be here to remind you that you're never alone." Eeyore, in his usual gloomy tone, added, "Even if it rains, which it probably will, but I'll still be here, too." Rabbit, ever the practical one, said, "And if you ever need help organizing, you know who to call." Christopher laughed, his heart overflowing with love for his friends. "Thank you, all of you. I'll never forget what you've taught me." Pooh leaned in close, resting his head against Christopher's shoulder. "And we'll never forget you, Christopher Robin. Not even for a moment." They sat there for a long time, the stars shining brightly above them, the air filled with a peaceful quiet. The 100-acre wood felt timeless, as though no matter what happened in the world beyond, this place, this feeling, would always remain. And as Christopher sat with his friends, he made a promise to himself. He would remember Pooh's lesson. He would slow down, take the time to enjoy the moments that mattered most, and carry the magic of the 100-acre wood with him, no matter where life took him. Because sometimes, as Pooh had said, doing less was the best way to find the sweetness in life. And Christopher knew that as long as he remembered that, he would always find his way back to the 100-acre wood. The sun rose slowly over the 100-acre wood, casting soft rays of golden light through the trees. Everything was peaceful. The birds chirped their morning songs, and the leaves rustled gently in the early breeze. Christopher Robin sat on a familiar patch of grass, his heart full of quiet joy. His friends, who had been with him through every adventure, every laugh, and every thoughtful moment, were gathered around him, watching the day begin. It had been a long journey for Christopher, a journey back to a place he had almost forgotten, and back to a version of himself he hadn't realized he'd lost. But now, sitting under the great oak tree with Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, and Rabbit, he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to take what he'd learned in the 100-acre wood back into his grown-up life. Pooh, as usual, sat beside him, munching on a pot of honey. He glanced up at Christopher with his big, thoughtful eyes. "You look very happy, Christopher Robin." Christopher smiled down at his old friend. "I am, Pooh. I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I'd lost." Piglet, who had been nervously fidgeting with a leaf, peeked up at him. "What did you find, Christopher Robin?" Christopher thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "I found myself. I'd been so busy with work, with grown-up things, that I forgot how important it was to slow down, to just enjoy the little moments, like this." Pooh nodded wisely. "Ah, yes, the little moments are the best ones, especially when they include honey." Tigger, ever full of energy, bounced into the conversation. "And bouncing. Don't forget bouncing." Tiggers know that bouncing makes any moment a big moment. Christopher laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. You're right, Tigger. I won't forget that either. Rabbit, always the practical one, straightened up and said, So, what's next for you, Christopher Robin? You can't stay here forever after all. Grown-ups have important things to do. Christopher's smile softened. That's true, Rabbit. I do have responsibilities, and I have to go back to them. But this time, things will be different. Eeyore, lying lazily on the ground, glanced up with his usual gloomy expression. Different, huh? Doesn't sound very exciting. Christopher knelt down and patted Eeyore's head. No, it is exciting, Eeyore. Because now I know I can bring a little bit of the 100 Acre Wood with me, wherever I go. I won't forget the joy, the laughter, and the peace I've found here. And I won't let work take away the important things in life, like spending time with the people who matter most. Pooh looked up at him, his eyes twinkling. Does that mean you'll come back to visit us? Christopher smiled, his heart swelling with affection for his dear friends. Of course, I'll come back. The 100 Acre Wood is always a part of me now. No matter how busy life gets, I'll always find my way back here. Pooh seemed satisfied with this answer, and he returned to his honey pot, humming a little tune. The others looked equally content, knowing that their friend wouldn't forget them. But then Piglet spoke up, his tiny voice full of concern. Christopher Robin, are you sure you'll be okay out there? The grown-up world seems so big. Christopher nodded, his voice calm and confident. I will be, Piglet. Because I've learned that even though the world can be busy and full of responsibilities, it's also full of wonderful things. I'll take the lessons I've learned here with me, how to slow down, how to be present, and how to enjoy the little moments. That way, I can handle whatever comes my way. Tigger gave a joyful bounce. Well, if you ever need a reminder, you know where to find us. The 100 Acre Wood is always open for bouncing, and for honey, of course. Christopher smiled warmly. Thank you, Tigger. I'll keep that in mind. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Christopher stood up, dusting off his trousers. It was time. Time to return to the world beyond the 100 Acre Wood, but this time with a new perspective. He looked around at his friends, Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, and Rabbit, each one of them a reminder of the best parts of life. And as he said his goodbyes, he knew in his heart that they would never be far from him. Goodbye for now, my friends, Christopher said, his voice soft but full of love. I'll be back soon. But until then, remember that you're always with me. Pooh waddled over and gave Christopher a big, warm hug. Goodbye, Christopher Robin. And remember, if you ever feel a little lost, just think of us. We'll be here, waiting for you. Tigger bounced up for his goodbye, grinning from ear to ear. And if you ever need a good bounce, you know who to call. Piglet gave a shy little wave. Goodbye, Christopher Robin. Be careful out there. Even Eeyore, who usually wasn't one for goodbyes, gave a small nod. Well, see you later, I suppose. Try not to get too busy. Rabbit, always the planner, gave a firm nod. Take care, Christopher. And remember, balance is key. Christopher chuckled softly. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you soon. With that, Christopher turned and began to walk away, his heart full and his spirit light. The forest was quiet as he left, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But he knew that the 100 Acre Wood would always be there, waiting for him, whenever he needed it. As he made his way back to the grown-up world, Christopher Robin felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The worries of work and responsibilities didn't seem so heavy anymore. He had learned that there was more to life than just getting things done. There was joy in slowing down, in being present, and in spending time with the people who mattered most. And as he stepped into the city, the noise and bustle of London all around him, Christopher smiled. He carried the magic of the 100 Acre Wood in his heart, and he knew that no matter how busy life got, he would always have a place of peace to return to. Because, after all, it wasn't the place that made life magical, it was the friends, the memories, and the lessons that made every moment special. And with that, Christopher Robin began his new beginning, ready to face whatever life brought him, knowing that his friends would always be with him.